Modernity always manages to give new phenotypes to the human collective, but one, more than others in recent years, has been able to plastically represent late capitalism: the linked diner. The linked diner is generally super enthusiastic about the economic and social system they live in, or at least that's how it comes off in their LinkedIn posts. You could say the linked diner is the real fish in the water of the current economic system and job market, but based on the simple idea that this system spares no one, it's, totally fair to ask some questions. First off, is it even possible to consider the linked diner a true modern anthropological category? Let's dive into the heart of the discussion. The core thesis is the linked diner belongs to a sort of social class entirely produced by the era of late capitalism and social media. I'm referring to the linked diner as a group of individuals who've emerged in the job market and in society, especially over the last 20 or 30 years. So my point isn't strictly tied to LinkedIn itself, but to a type of interaction with the job market and the kind of narrative people create about the current economic, social, and work environment in the contemporary world. As I was saying, what I call the linked diner lives in a sort of showcase environment, which, for obvious reason in today's world, is the web, specifically the social network that share its name, LinkedIn obviously, but at the same time they operate within a broader economic and social system, which is none other than Western late capitalism. They don't have real equivalents in the class structure of the past, but that alone isn't enough to define them as something completely original. The linked diner actually manages to be a mix of the clerical class, think priests, and the producer class, which back in the day was often the slave class, or like the dirt poor, the lowest rung of society, and yet the unaware foundation of any ancient system. So the linked diner ensures the continuity of a system. They are the keepers of the rituals, they burn incense to the gods, they carry out ceremonies, and above all, the rites of humiliation. You're not gonna tell me that job hunting and all the squalid performance around HR, resumes, fake job postings, endless interviews and so on aren't a rite of humiliation. But at the same time, the linked diner is a part of a class that doesn't hold the real decision-making power, at least not the legend kind. At best, they are a middle manager deluded into thinking they've got influence, but even their tiniest choices could lead to disastrous consequences for their career, unless we are talking about straight-up fraud or a Ponzi scheme. Generally, the entire corporate pyramid's weight somehow falls on them. I mean the company org chart, obviously, and it's a pyramid that only holds up because of the silent, fearful acceptance of this subservient group. Not for nothing, I'm specifically talking about late capitalism here. Not just capitalism in general, because it's late capitalism that's the regime we are living under in the West, and it doesn't make sense to imagine scenarios outside of that reality. Nor, frankly, to pretend the world the linked diner operates in is fake. In a way, it's all the non-linked diner who are the real fish out of water. The managerial world was already a thing before World War II, but it's only hit its dystopian peak in the last 20 years or so. What matters here through is the very evolution of capitalism as an economic system, and I'd say a social system too, that reached its saturation. It doesn't survive by overcoming its contradictions anymore, it thrives on the contradictions themselves. But let's backtrack a bit and do some history, and before that, a disclaimer. With the ideas I'm about to lay out, I'm not trying to go full communist mode or anything, but just to point out how even the basic balances of a more or less sustainable capitalism have totally fallen apart, especially in the so-called developed or Western, if you will, countries. What started developing way before the fall of the Berlin Wall is a trend toward the crumbling of the last social filters that traditional capitalist society managed to maintain, or at least believed it had to maintain to ensure production. A simple division of roles and at the same time a cooperation between the state, companies and intermediaries ensured the rise of the middle class, but it also enabled consumption and some pretty major technological advancements. What you really see in the Western countries after World War II, at least up until the 80s, is the centrality of industry as the go-to productive sector. Capitalism in those decades was all about production, innovation, and it was full of vitality, allowing the so-called middle class to flourish. What's actually celebrated with the fall of the Berlin Wall is the unleashing of this unrestrained, leaderless capitalism, at least with no clear command center you can pin down. In the West, late capitalism is celebrated with the delocalization of production and the promise, turns out a scam, by a bunch of elites of an economy almost entirely focused on services, big corporations, tech, and the bureaucratic management of production shipped off to faraway countries. But above all, it sold the vision of a world of consumers. A capitalism without the bourgeoisie, basically, and without material production. An economic system where general moralizing isn't controlled by an elite or by parties with deep territorial roots, or even by media conglomerates, but by the often uncontrollable flow of goods and information, so much so that it's not even the goods or information that's the central anymore, but the flow itself. It's obviously nonsense to think like a lot of post-Marxists or self-proclaimed communists or whatever else. Those folks blame capitalism for every human misery, but they fall into a historical contradiction, because Marx himself was like the first cheerleader for capitalism. The further risk is buying into narratives that are way too extreme, where there's not even a tiny distinction between what was going on before 1989 and what took hold in Europe and in US after the collapse of the socialist bloc. Still, you can't exactly hide the fact that a ton of the struggles of today's generations come from the system they grew up in, full of expectations that turned out to be total bullshit of the worst kind. But it's exactly this mechanism of constant promises and the desire that's never been satisfied that drives the more or less understandable dynamics of late capitalism. What's absurd is the sheer impossibility of actually breaking free from this octopus grip, and we'll get into some reasons why. In the background of the linked diner and plenty of other anthropological categories born in recent decades is the distinction between old-school capitalism and late capitalism, which I don't think, or at least I don't want to believe, are linked by some inevitable chronological consequence. Late capitalism is just a system that's devouring itself. As long as Western countries kept a certain level of domestic production and steady participation in work, communities, political parties, and all those filters that connected the top to the bottom, a balance, shaky as it was, held up. And there were times where a certain kind of social climbing was possible. But the genius and self-destructive strategy of late capitalism was exactly this: preserving and even encouraging consumption, especially if it's frivolous or intangible, and removing production from the visible field. This kicked off a process of tertiarization and bureaucratization of society, which is the perfect breeding ground where the LinkedIner is born and thinks they are thriving. Then, after widely witnessing the decline of a real production-based economy, they started eroding the very idea of owning tangible things. This process hit its peak after the 2008 crisis, when the contradiction of a fake system seemed totally unsustainable. In recent years, the propaganda machine has reached an ideological justification, sometimes becoming the ultimate expression of Stockholm Syndrome, where owning a home, a car, a family, and all the other statuses the middle class had earned in previous decades are seen as risks, not just to economic stability, but to a person's inner and psychological well-being, or as harmful to the climate, the planet, gender dynamics, personal freedom, etc. This spills over into the definitive loss of community or family as fundamental and non-negotiable elements of society. All that's left is the individual, and even that doesn't seem like a solid starting point anymore. But as the cherry on top, the economic system in the West since the 90s has sparked a race to the bottom among the poor, while at the same time keeping hordes of people, growing hordes mind you, convinced they can climb to the top, leaning on intrinsic marketing of the system. This means the system doesn't even have to invest much in marketing or propaganda anymore. The people who made it or think they've made it take care of that. In this system, all you need is to believe. And let's be clear, this process is way more efficient than you'd think, and it's probably why the path of individualism still feels like a more tempting alternative to collective awareness. LinkedIn, in its most unhinged posts, is a celebration of a certain awareness of how disgusting the economic system, the job market, work itself, and everything tied to people's lives in this glittering historical phase really is. But even so, there's this sneaky voice that creeps in. You are not like the others. You got qualities that'll let you make it rise above everyone else. It's like main character syndrome extended to everybody, which keeps people from seeing how the system is actually in crisis. The late capitalist system basically runs on nothing, or rather on the energy it pulls from itself, consuming itself and everything else. On the raw, primal drive and friction it managed to extract from people, workers, but especially from a competition so cutthroat, it doesn't even allow the bare minimum of cooperation needed for the competition to function. It's a kind of pounding in the mortar, like the French generals called their non-strategy during World War I. Carnage, a slaughterhouse of bodies just made more efficient. Pure textbook extraction of vital energy. And all of it with system that devour society, doing nothing but kicking the can down the road, and they let the option of collapse become yet another way to dodge responsibilities, to not feel involved, to believe you can still make it at everyone else's expense. From a purely economic perspective, with less industry, production offshored, domestic demand gutted, all that's left is the bureaucratic management of a fake system, or, as I said, direct self-devouring competition, scavenging for crumbs, and more or less blatant Ponzi schemes. And it's in this environment that marketing, especially self-marketing and indirectly marketing the system that legitimizes itself, takes root. But among regular folks who more or less unconsciously justify and approve of the economic and social system they live in, only one group manages to stand out as the ultimate court priest, and maybe even the jester, the link diner. In this scenario, I've described some corners of LinkedIn, and I'm emphasizing some because obviously I'm not trying to generalize, are the self-glorification of a social class and a system that's got no real roots in the ground. Collective ceremony to pat yourself on the back and sugarcoat a rotten system. Project managers everywhere, endless posts that are like straight up unhinged celebrations of meaningless milestones, HR and impossible qualification demands. Mythomania as a mirror of something deeply missing in our modern view of work and workplaces. The link diner is the true interpreter of this phase of history. And plenty of link diners probably even get the absurd dynamics they are forced to play along with in this twisted game, like the high society Venetian ladies showing off their finest dresses in the Republic of Venice in the 18th century. Link diners flaunt their loyalty to an inhuman floating fake system, even while being aware of the squalor of the system they are playing into. Creating alter egos obsessed with productivity as a humanity's ultimate mission betrays not just the typical need for approval and flattery, kinda common across all social media, but also the need for order in their lives, the need for a sense that they are on the right path. This is crucial in a situation where work no longer guarantees a home, a family, a car, kids. It's just work, barely survival. So you might as well be a cog, an exceptional employee, feeding that perfectionist part of yourself to feel useful for something in the faint hope of hitting the jackpot, that someone of some divine power will notice you and lift you above the rest. The narrative is baked into an individual's psychological needs. It's a life lived as a story of climbing, constantly hitting bigger and bigger goals, which in a way keeps the deep sense of emptiness, an emptiness produced by a system that's fundamentally alienating. And it's not just because production's been scrapped, but also, as I said, because tangible consumption's shrinking. Starting a family is becoming possible, and everything's geared toward a strictly individual race for promotion, wealth, or a financial shield against some future economic or social catastrophe. But maybe, to borrow from Uncle Ted, this is a will to dominate born from the realization that they hold no power, not even over themselves. And not just that, I'd like to quote a passage from Zizek, who's riffing on Lacan here. In societies where the idea of God has crumbled, the indispensable sensation of the big other is propped up by bureaucracy, and thus by that order always coming from above. Bureaucracy, like a religion, is a series of rituals taken as dogma, which you are not allowed to question. Now, this could definitely apply to the mid-20th century middle class, which was largely made up of clerks and administrators of still productive Western system. But there's also some overlap with the link diner's world. As I said, the link diner performs rituals and takes stances that are part of a truly bureaucratic hierarchy, but in reality they manage nothing except their own image, their own persona, and all they do is contribute to the marketing of a system that's eating itself alive. In their Earth of Earths, the link diners knows they are a Venetian woman in a declining republic, and they know they are being courted poorly because all big merchants are investing everything left in Palladius villas, but they can't do anything about it. Deep down, their ambitious soul craves only a total collapse, or to retreat to a simple, more authentic country life, like some other link diners have managed to do. Hence, maybe, the hypocrisy of everyone else, our hypocrisy, where we don't ask ourselves how we can cheer on such a radical career or mindset shift. Or maybe modernity, the service sector, and the whole progress, including the entire job market, was just a way to pull most people out of the countryside, stick them in an office, and snatch the land out from under them. The merchant's maxim is still those who scorn end up buying. But that might be a topic for another video. If you are into the videos on this channel, hit that subscribe button. Let me know what you think in the comments and if there are any topics you'd like me to dig into for future videos. Catch you next time.